Somewhere in America tonight, someone is standing at a kitchen sink rinsing out a yogurt container, checking the number on the bottom, carefully placing it in the blue bin. They have done this for 20 years. What they don't know, what nobody told them, is that the company picking up that bin gets paid whether the container gets recycled or not. The rinsing was never the point. Here's the assumption most people make. Recycling companies collect plastic, process it into usable raw material, sell it to manufacturers, and profit from that transaction. The system runs on recovered value. Logical, clean, also wrong. What recycling companies actually sell is a service contract. A city signs an agreement with a hauler. The hauler agrees to collect recyclable material from every household on a set schedule. The city pays a fixed fee, calculated per ton of material collected. Not per ton recycled. Not per ton sold downstream to a manufacturer. Per ton picked up off the curb. The contract says nothing about what happens to the material after it leaves your driveway. A truck that collects 12 tons of sorted plastic and delivers it to a legitimate processing facility has fulfilled its contract. A truck that collects 12 tons of sorted plastic and drops the entire load into a landfill has also fulfilled its contract. The fee is identical. Collected. That's it. That's the whole job. There's a second layer. Many facilities charge what the industry calls a gate fee, a per-load charge to receive incoming material. When recycling markets are healthy, facilities pay cities for clean, sorted loads. When markets collapse and loads arrive contaminated, facilities flip the equation. They charge to accept the load instead. The hauler still collected. The facility still processed or rejected the load. Both still got paid. The city absorbed whatever it cost to landfill the rejects. The financial incentive to actually recycle the material belongs to no one in that chain who has any operational control over the outcome. But here's where it gets genuinely strange, because the system wasn't always this way. Something changed it. One decision, one country, 1 year. For roughly 30 years, the economics of American plastic recycling rested on a single buyer. China was purchasing approximately 70% of the world's recyclable material, paper, metal, and plastic, including most of what Americans placed in their blue bins. The arrangement wasn't clean. Material shipped overseas was often poorly sorted and heavily contaminated. But China had the labor costs, the processing capacity, and the manufacturing demand to make it work at a price American facilities couldn't come close to matching. Everyone involved had a reason to let the arrangement hold. Then, in January 2018, China enacted the National Sword Policy. It banned imports of 24 categories of solid waste and set contamination limits so strict that virtually no American recycling stream could meet them. Effective immediately. If recycling companies were primarily in the business of recycling, this should have triggered a reckoning. Contracts should have been renegotiated. Programs should have been restructured. A public conversation about what the system actually was should have happened. Instead, collection continued. Bills went out, fees were paid, trucks ran their routes. The only thing that changed was where the material went, which was, in many cities, directly into landfills. Several municipalities that had been running curbside recycling programs for 2 decades quietly issued notices that most plastic would now be landfilled. Not a press conference, not a public vote. A footnote in a sanitation department update. Some cities issued no notice at all. The trucks kept running. They always keep running. The business didn't collapse when the recycling stopped because the collection infrastructure, the contracts, the trucks, the routes, the billing, had never been financially dependent on the recycling outcome. China's decision didn't break the system. It revealed what the system actually was. So, how did half the country end up believing recycling was working in the first place? That answer goes back to 1988, and it starts with a symbol. In 1970, a graphic design student named Gary Anderson won a competition to create a symbol for the first Earth Day. The result was the 3 chasing arrows now recognized in virtually every country on Earth. Public domain, free for anyone to use, designed to represent recycling in any material, any context. 18 years later, the Society of the Plastics Industry did something quietly significant. They created the Resin Identification Code, a system of 7 numbers, each representing a different type of plastic resin. They placed each number inside a triangle of chasing arrows, visually identical to the universal recycling symbol, legally distinct. They then lobbied nearly 40 state legislatures to mandate that this code appear on every plastic product manufactured. Within a few years, almost every piece of plastic in America carried what looked, to any consumer, exactly like the recycling symbol. Here is what that number actually means: the type of resin used to make the product. Nothing else. No claim about recyclability, no promise of processing. A manufacturing classification code wearing the recycling symbol's clothes. Numbers 1 and 2, the plastics used in most drink bottles and milk jugs, have a functioning recycling market in most of the country. Numbers 3 through 7 do not. All 7 carry the same arrows. If you have spent years checking that number and sorting carefully, you were responding to a system designed to make you feel like you were doing something. The symbol was not designed for recyclers. It was designed for producers. There is one more mechanism that keeps the economics running without accountability. Recycling facilities can legally reject an entire collected load if it exceeds a set contamination threshold. The threshold varies by facility, by contract, by year. One item outside the accepted stream can push a batch past the limit and void the whole load. When that happens, the sequence matters. The hauler collected the load and was paid. The facility received it, assessed it, rejected it, charged a gate fee, and was paid. The city then bears the cost of landfilling the rejected material. Nobody in that chain lost money. The city did. The contamination rules themselves compound the problem. What is acceptable in one municipality is grounds for rejection in the next. Rules shift with every contract renewal, every facility change, every commodity fluctuation. Consumers have no reliable way to know the current rules because the rules were not written for consumers. A yogurt container with a number 5 on the bottom, rinsed, dried, placed in the correct bin, collected, sorted at the facility, rejected because the batch arrived above the contamination threshold, landfilled. The truck still ran. The fee was still charged. You did everything right. To understand why this was allowed to go on for 50 years, you need to go back to a campaign most people over 50 remember, even if they don't remember who paid for it. Keep America Beautiful was founded in 1953. Its most recognized moment came in 1971. A television advertisement showing a man in Native American dress paddling a canoe through polluted water, a single tear running down his face as litter lands at his feet. It ran for years. It became one of the most awarded public service announcements in American broadcast history. Keep America Beautiful was funded by Coca-Cola, Pepsi, the American Can Company, and a coalition of the country's largest packaging manufacturers. What the campaign actually accomplished was a permanent shift in vocabulary. The problem of plastic waste, which had previously been framed as a production problem, too much disposable packaging being manufactured, became a littering problem, a personal failing. The responsibility moved from the industry that created billions of single-use containers to the individuals who had to deal with them. The pattern of industry investment follows a consistent timeline. In the early 1970s, when environmental legislation threatened restrictions on plastic production, funding for recycling campaigns increased sharply. Once the legislative pressure passed, funding contracted. The same pattern repeated in the early 1990s, again after 2008. Internal industry documents from the late 1960s and the early 1970s used words like costly, serious doubt that it can ever be made viable on an economic basis, and in one assessment, virtually hopeless to describe plastic recycling. The campaigns ran for 50 years after those words were written. The generation that grew up carefully sorting their bins was, in large part, sorting them because the industry that made the plastic needed someone else to feel responsible for it. One more thing. Reduce, reuse, recycle has always been listed in that order. Reduce is first. Recycle is last, a fallback when the first two options have been exhausted. The campaigns inverted this in public consciousness. They made recycling the primary action while reduce and reuse faded into afterthoughts. That inversion kept production volumes exactly where the industry needed them. Two materials have been recycled profitably, at scale, without government subsidy, for decades: aluminum and glass. Manufacturing aluminum from recycled cans uses approximately 95% less energy than extracting it from raw ore. That gap is large enough that the economics are self-sustaining. No mandate required, no campaign necessary, no symbol lobbied into 40 state legislatures. The financial incentive is built directly into the material. Glass follows the same basic logic. Some of you remember what that looked like in practice. Glass milk bottles were delivered to the door and collected empty on the same route. Soda bottles with a cash deposit meant virtually every bottle came back. Those bottles were cleaned, sterilized, and refilled. Many made 40 trips before being retired. Return rates for deposit bottles routinely exceeded 95%. That system did not end because it stopped working. It ended because a plastic bottle cost less to manufacture, required no return infrastructure, and converted a reuse problem into a disposal problem that someone else could worry about. The deposit bottle system, the most efficient consumer recycling program in American history, was not replaced because it failed. It was replaced because something else was more profitable. Here is the actual answer to the question in this title. Recycling companies run 3 revenue streams. None of them require recycling to succeed. The first is the municipal collection contract. Fixed fees paid by cities, structured over 5 to 10-year terms. These contracts survive market collapses, trade bans, facility rejections, and policy changes. They pay per ton collected. They pay regardless of outcome. The second is the gate fee. Processing facilities charge per load received. A load that arrives contaminated is assessed and, if rejected, still generates a gate fee on the way in. Several major waste management companies operate both sorting facilities and landfills under the same corporate structure. A rejected load does not leave their system. It moves from one revenue center to another. The third is public subsidy. Processing facilities receive government infrastructure funding for handling recyclable material. The auditing of what actually happens to that material after sorting is significantly less rigorous than the auditing of the handling itself. The subsidy flows for receiving the material. What the material becomes is a separate question that, in practice, rarely gets a formal answer. Recycling companies do not make money on what gets recycled. They make money on the infrastructure that exists because recycling is a social expectation. The expectation keeps contracts live. The failure keeps operating costs low. The gap between what people believe is happening and what is actually happening is where the margin lives. A system that genuinely worked at scale would require expensive sorting technology, serious infrastructure investment, and commodity market development that would cut directly into that margin. 50 years in, that investment has not materialized. That is not an accident of complexity. It is a consequence of incentives that were never pointed toward the outcome they advertised. This is not a story without a way forward. The deposit bottle system proved that consumer return programs can reach 95% efficiency when the economics reward return instead of disposal. Germany, Austria, and parts of Scandinavia have passed extended producer responsibility laws. legislation that requires manufacturers to fund the end-of-life disposal of the packaging they produce. Recycling rates in those countries improved not because consumers sorted more carefully, but because the financial incentive finally pointed in the right direction. The problem was never that people did not care. The problem was that caring was directed at the wrong lever.